A millionaire disguised himself as a beggar and promised to donate a fortune to a kind person who stopped to help him, but he was ignored by everyone. The next day, a single mother in dirty and torn clothes approached, and what she did left him in tears. Marina felt the weight of 1,000 mountains on her shoulders as she observed Sophia's pale face lying on that hospital bed that seemed too big for her frail 7-year-old body. The deep dark circles under her own eyes revealed the 3 sleepless nights spent in that uncomfortable blue plastic chair that creaked with every movement, holding her daughter's cold little hand and praying to every saint she knew. The characteristic smell of hospital disinfectant no longer bothered her. It had become part of her, just like the anguish that tightened her chest with each difficult breath Sophia took. Marina caressed the girl's brown hair, once so bright and full of life, now dull and stuck to her forehead, sweaty from the fever that came and went without warning. Sophia's dry lips trembled slightly when she opened her eyes and looked at her mother with that green gaze that, even while sick, still shone with love. "Mommy's here, my love. Mommy will never abandon you," whispered Marina, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on forming. Sophia tried to smile, but the effort seemed to drain what little energy she still had, making her close her eyes again as her breathing became more shallow and rapid. Marina gently squeezed her daughter's tiny hand, feeling the fragile bones under the thin, pale skin that no longer had the healthy, rosy tone of a normal child. The door to the room opened with a soft creak, and the doctor entered with heavy steps, carrying a clipboard and an expression that Marina had already learned to fear during those endless weeks of hospitalization. He was a tall man with graying hair and thick-framed glasses that constantly slipped down his nose, forcing him to push them back with his index finger in a nervous gesture. Marina felt her heart race, and her hands began to tremble slightly as he approached, flipping through papers with an expression that grew darker with each turned page. "Mrs. Marina, we need to talk about Sophia's situation, please. Can you come with me?" he said with that professional voice doctors use to deliver bad news. Marina gently kissed Sophia's hot forehead and rose from the chair with shaky legs, feeling every muscle in her body protest after so many hours in the same position. The hospital corridor was busy with hurried nurses pushing stretchers and medication carts, the constant sound of monitors beeping at different rhythms, creating a hospital symphony that she had involuntarily memorized. She followed the doctor to a small room at the end of the corridor, where the white walls and the formica table created an even colder and more impersonal atmosphere than the rest of the hospital. The doctor closed the door behind them and indicated a chair for Marina, who sat on the edge of the seat, tense as a spring about to jump. He adjusted his glasses and opened the folder he had brought, revealing documents that Marina immediately recognized as administrative forms and hospital bills. "Doctor, please tell me you found a solution, I beg you," said Marina with a voice choked with emotion. The doctor sighed deeply and interlaced his fingers on the table, his eyes finally meeting hers with a mixture of compassion and professional resignation that promised no good news. Marina could see her own frightened reflection in his glasses, a 32-year-old woman who seemed to have aged a decade in the last week, with disheveled black hair and wrinkled clothes from wearing them so long without having time to change. The doctor's hands trembled slightly when he picked up the first document, a medical report full of technical terms that Marina didn't fully understand, but that sounded like a sentence. She observed his lips move as he searched for the right words to explain something he clearly didn't want to say, and the silence that preceded his words was almost unbearable. The air conditioner hummed softly in the corner of the room, creating the only sound besides the tense breathing of the two. "Mrs. Marina, Sophia's condition has worsened in the last 48 hours, and the heart surgery can no longer be postponed," he finally said, each word falling like a stone in Marina's stomach. Marina felt the world spin around her and needed to grip the edges of the chair to avoid falling, her vision becoming blurred by tears she could no longer contain. She already knew the situation was serious, could see it in her daughter's tired eyes, in the growing difficulty to breathe, in the bluish tone that appeared on Sophia's lips when she made any minimal effort. But hearing those words aloud made everything terribly real and urgent, as if the time she thought she had simply evaporated before her eyes. Your hands were shaking so much that she had to intertwine them tightly on her lap to try to control herself, her nails digging into her skin in a desperate attempt to stay present and focused. The doctor continued flipping through the papers, clearly uncomfortable with the suffering he was causing. "How long does she have, doctor? How long does my daughter have without this surgery?" asked Marina, her voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. The doctor adjusted his glasses again, that nervous gesture that Marina had noticed he made whenever he needed to deliver particularly difficult news. He flipped through a few more papers, as if the answers might change if he looked at the medical tests one more time. But Marina knew he was just buying time to find the least cruel way to say something devastating. The room seemed to get smaller with each passing second, the white walls closing around her like a prison of despair and helplessness. The doctor cleared his throat and finally raised his eyes from the papers, his face showing the weight of having to give that kind of news to a desperate mother. Marina could see that he was a good man, who probably had children at home and understood the pain she was feeling, but that didn't change the medical reality he needed to communicate. "Without the surgery in her current state, we're talking about weeks, Mrs. Marina, maybe a month if we're lucky. But her quality of life will deteriorate rapidly," he responded, with a voice heavy with grief. The doctor's words echoed in Marina's mind like the sound of a funeral bell, each syllable hammering the terrible reality she had been trying to deny. Weeks, maybe a month, was all that remained for her little Sophia if she couldn't get the money for the surgery, and Marina felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She thought of all the dreams she had for her daughter, all the Sunday mornings they would spend together, all the birthdays they would celebrate, all the hugs they would share, and the possibility of losing all of that was unbearable. Tears were flowing freely now down her tired face, dripping onto the threadbare skirt she had been wearing for 3 consecutive days, but she made no effort to wipe them away. The doctor pushed a box of tissues toward her, a kind gesture that only intensified her anguish because it showed how pathetic her situation was. "I know she needs the surgery, doctor, I know that, but you know I don't have the money," said Marina between sobs. The doctor lowered his eyes to the documents again, and Marina saw his shoulders drop in an expression of defeat that mirrored her own. He took another paper from the folder, this one stamped with the seal of the hospital administration, and Marina felt her stomach turn as she recognized the official letterhead that always brought bad news. The silence in the room was so dense that she could hear the blood pulsing in her ears, mixed with the constant humming of the air conditioner and the muffled noises of the hospital outside. The doctor cleared his throat before speaking, clearly looking for the least painful words to communicate something inevitable. Marina squeezed her hands so hard that her nails left crescent-shaped marks on her palms, the physical pain being a welcome relief compared to the emotional agony. "Mrs. Marina, the hospital administration has made a decision about Sophia's case, and I need to communicate this to you," he said with a tense voice. Marina already knew what was coming before he even continued. She could see in his eyes the same expression she had seen in so many other hospital staff in the past few weeks. It was the look of someone who had to execute orders they didn't agree with, of someone who had to put bureaucracy above human compassion. She felt a wave of nausea rise up her throat and had to breathe deeply several times to avoid vomiting right there, the bitter taste of bile burning her mouth. The doctor turned the paper so she could see the official document, full of technical and legal terms that basically said that Sophia was no longer a priority in the system. Marina wanted to scream, break things, shake that man by the shoulders and make him understand that they were talking about a child's life, not numbers on a spreadsheet. "The hospital can no longer keep Sophia hospitalized without payment guarantees, Mum. I'm sorry, but those are the rules," the doctor continued with evident discomfort. Marina felt the words like stabs in her chest, each syllable tearing apart the little hope that still remained in her heart. She looked at the doctor with pleading eyes, looking for any sign that this was just a nightmare from which she would wake up, but the cruel reality remained relentless. The white walls of the room seemed to close in on her, creating a claustrophobic sensation that made her struggle to breathe. She thought of Sophia in her room, small and fragile, fighting against a disease she was not to blame for having, and the injustice of it all made her feel a deep anger mixed with despair. The doctor continued explaining the procedures, but Marina could barely hear his words through the buzzing in her ears. "How much exactly does the surgery cost? Maybe I could try to get a loan, sell some things," she asked, clinging to any thread of hope. The doctor turned a page and pointed to a number highlighted in red in the upper corner of the document, and Marina felt the air escape from her lungs as if she had been punched in the stomach. It was an astronomical amount, more money than she had ever seen in her entire life, the equivalent of years of work as a cleaner at the Albuquerque house where she earned minimum wage. She did the calculations mentally and realized that even if she didn't spend a penny on food, rent, or anything else, it would take a decade to gather that amount. Banks had already denied her loan requests due to lack of collateral and credit history, and she had no rich relatives or influential friends who could help. Marina was just a single mother who had been abandoned by Sophia's father when he discovered the pregnancy, struggling alone to raise her daughter with dignity. "It's 300,000, Mrs. Marina. I know it's an impossible amount for most people," said the doctor with genuine sadness in his voice. Marina felt the world collapse upon hearing the amount out loud, the sum sounding even more impossible when pronounced. 300,000 reais might as well be 3 million for someone who could barely pay the rent for a room in a tenement. She thought of all the times she had saved every penny, skipped meals to ensure Sophia ate, sewn and resewn the same clothes to avoid having to buy new ones. All her effort, all her sacrifice, was worth nothing in the face of that cruel number that separated her daughter from life. The tears returned with full force, blurring her vision as she sobbed uncontrollably, her entire body shaking with the force of despair. "This is a death sentence, doctor. You're telling me my daughter won't survive because I'm poor?" she accused with a voice full of revolt. The doctor didn't deny the accusation, because they both knew it was exactly the cruel reality of the healthcare system. He ran his hand through his grey hair in a gesture of frustration, and Marina realized that he too was fighting against his own emotions. It was evident that he didn't agree with that situation, that he had probably tried to find alternatives, but was trapped by the limitations of the system just as much as she was. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by Marina's muffled sobs and the ticking of a clock on the wall that seemed to mark the precious seconds of Sophia's life slipping away. "I tried to include Sophia in all possible assistance programs, but the waiting lists are enormous, and her condition is too critical to wait," the doctor explained with genuine regret. Marina nodded mechanically, having heard this explanation before from various social workers and hospital staff. The public system was overwhelmed, resources were limited, there were other children in line, all the bureaucratic excuses that didn't change the fact that Sophia was slipping away. She rose from the chair with shaky legs and walked to the small window of the room, looking at the grey sky outside that seemed to reflect her state of mind. Down below, people hurried along in their normal lives, unaware that up here a mother's world was crumbling. Marina rested her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes, trying to find strength she no longer knew where to seek. "Is there any other option, doctor? Anything I can do?" she begged without turning around. The doctor hesitated for a moment before taking another set of papers from his folder, and Marina heard the rustling of the sheets with a terrible premonition. She turned slowly and saw in his hands the hospital discharge forms, those documents that meant taking Sophia home without the surgery that would save her life. Her hands began to shake violently when she understood what he was about to propose, and she shook her head in denial before he even opened his mouth. The doctor placed the papers on the table carefully, as if they were explosives, and Marina could see that his hands were also trembling slightly. "Mrs. Marina, if you cannot guarantee payment in a few hours, you will have to sign these forms and take Sophia home," he said in an almost inaudible voice. Marina felt her legs failing and had to lean against the wall to avoid falling, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow as if she were drowning in solid air. Taking Sophia home under those conditions would be condemning her to a slow and painful death, without the medical equipment that kept her stable, without the intravenous medications that alleviated her suffering. She imagined her daughter struggling to breathe in the stuffy room of the tenement, without air conditioning, in the suffocating heat of the city, without the monitors that alerted when something was wrong. "Are you asking me to take my daughter home with no chance of survival?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief and horror. The silence that followed was the most painful confirmation Marina could receive. The doctor lowered his eyes, unable to face her as he confirmed with an almost imperceptible nod. Marina felt a deep rage explode in her chest, a fury against the unjust world that put a price on the life of an innocent child. She wanted to break everything in that room, scream until her lungs exploded, do something, anything to change that cruel reality. But all she could do was fall back into the chair, her body shaking with violent sobs that seemed to tear her soul apart. "She's only 7 years old, doctor. Only 7 years old," she repeated like a mantra, as if Sophia's age could magically change the situation. The doctor stood up and walked around the desk, placing a gentle hand on Marina's shoulder in a gesture of comfort that only intensified her pain. She could feel that he really cared, that this situation deeply affected him, but his compassion didn't pay hospital bills or perform surgeries. Marina looked at the forms on the desk through her tears, the blurred letters forming an incomprehensible smudge that seemed to mock her despair. Signing those papers would be accepting defeat, giving up fighting for Sophia's life, but not signing meant the girl would be forcibly removed from the hospital. "I can't sign this, doctor. I can't give up on her," Marina said, her voice hoarse from crying. The doctor returned to his chair and picked up a pen, carefully placing it next to the forms as a silent invitation that Marina didn't want to accept. He explained that he could prescribe medications for home use and teach some basic care that she could provide at home, but they both knew it would only be palliative, prolonging the suffering without a real chance of cure. Marina imagined herself trying to be a nurse, doctor, and mother at the same time, without knowledge, without equipment, without hope. The pen on the desk seemed to weigh tons, a simple object that carried the weight of an impossible decision. "So you have a few hours to think, but when the hospital initiates the compulsory discharge process, you will have to take your daughter to your home," the doctor informed her with regret. Marina nodded mechanically, her mind trying to process the cruel deadline she had to find a fortune or accept losing her daughter. The time mentioned by the doctor seemed like an eternity and a blink of an eye, too much time for despair and too little time for a miracle. She stood up with difficulty, her legs feeling like jelly, and walked toward the door without taking the forms, as if not touching them could make them cease to exist. The doctor called her before she left, and Marina turned, hoping against all logic that he had changed his mind or found a solution. "Mrs. Marina, I really am sorry if there was anything I could do personally," he said sincerely. Marina nodded, unable to speak through the knot in her throat, and left the room feeling like a condemned woman returning to her cell. The hospital corridor seemed endless as she walked back to Sophia's room, each step weighing like lead. Nurses rushed by without noticing her, too busy with their routines to notice a shattered mother walking like a ghost through the corridors. Marina stopped at the door of Sophia's room and took several deep breaths, trying to compose her expression so as not to frighten her daughter. She wiped away her tears with the back of her hand and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Be strong for her," she murmured to herself like a prayer. When Marina entered the room, Sophia was awake, her little green eyes lighting up at the sight of her mother, despite the evident exhaustion in her pale features. The girl tried to sit up in bed, but the effort left her breathless, and Marina ran to help her, adjusting the pillows to make her more comfortable. Sophia held her mother's hand with her fragile little hand, and Marina felt her heart break a little more when she noticed how weak she was. The girl smiled, that sweet smile that could still light up the room even in the darkest circumstances, and Marina had to fight not to collapse in tears again. "Mommy, were you crying?" Sophia asked with her weak but perceptive little voice. Marina forced another smile and caressed her daughter's face with infinite tenderness, memorizing every detail of that little face she loved more than her own life. Sophia's green eyes, inherited from the father she never knew, shone with an intelligence and perception that sometimes frightened Marina, as if the girl knew more than she should about her condition. Marina sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the wires and tubes connected to Sophia's fragile body, and held her little hand between hers. The heart monitor beside the bed maintained its constant rhythm, a sound that had become strangely comforting in recent weeks. "No, my love. Mommy just missed you," Marina lied with a choked voice. Sophia didn't seem convinced, but didn't insist, perhaps too weak to question or too kind to force her mother to admit the truth. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, breathing with difficulty, and Marina watched worriedly as her small chest rose and fell irregularly. When Sophia opened her eyes again, there was a shadow of fear in them that broke Marina's heart. The girl squeezed her mother's hand with what little strength she had, and Marina could feel the subtle tremor in her tiny fingers. "Mommy, I'm going to get better, aren't I?" Sophia asked in a voice so small that Marina had to lean in to hear. Marina felt the words stuck in her throat, unable to lie but unable to tell the truth. She gently pulled Sophia into her arms, careful with the medical wires, and hugged her as if she could protect her from the cruel world by the strength of her love alone. Sophia's little body seemed even smaller and more fragile in her arms, and Marina could feel every bone through the thin hospital gown. She kissed the top of her daughter's head, inhaling the familiar scent even mixed with the smell of medicine and hospital. Tears silently ran down her face as she gently rocked Sophia as she used to do when she was a baby. "Of course you will, my love. Mommy will find a way. Mommy always finds a way," she promised, knowing she was making a promise she didn't know if she could keep. Sophia relaxed in her mother's arms, apparently comforted by the words, even though something in her eyes suggested she perceived more than Marina would like. The girl began to cough, a dry and painful cough that shook her fragile body, and Marina quickly helped her drink water from the cup with a straw on the side table. Each movement seemed to require a monumental effort from Sophia, and Marina noticed with growing alarm that her lips had a slight bluish coloration. She pressed the button to call the nurse, trying not to show panic so as not to frighten her daughter. Sophia held her hand with surprising strength and looked into her mother's eyes with an intensity that caught her off guard. "Mommy, if I go to live in heaven, will you be okay?" the girl asked with devastating maturity for her 7 years. Marina felt as if she had been shot in the chest, Sophia's question hitting her with the force of a derailed train. She held her daughter's face between her hands, looking deeply into those green eyes that were her entire world, and struggled to keep her voice steady. How could a 7-year-old ask such a question? How could she be thinking about death when she should be concerned with dolls and cartoons? Marina swallowed the sob that threatened to escape and forced a confident smile she didn't feel. The nurse entered the room, and Marina had to step away so she could check Sophia's vital signs. "You're not going to live in heaven, my love. Don't say such things. You're going to grow up and be the ballerina you've always dreamed of," Marina said with iron determination. The nurse checked the monitors and adjusted the oxygen flow, giving Marina a concerned look that confirmed her worst fears. Sophia was getting worse. Time was running out faster than the doctor had predicted. When the nurse left, Marina returned to the bedside and held Sophia's hand again, determined to memorize every second she had with her daughter. Sophia smiled weakly and closed her eyes, clearly exhausted by the brief conversation. Marina watched her chest rise and fall irregularly, counting each breath as if she could keep her alive by her vigilance alone. "Mommy will fight for you until the end, my love. Until the last second," she promised in a low voice. The following hours passed in a haze of desperation and determination as Marina stayed by Sophia's side, singing softly the songs she liked, telling stories about princesses and magical kingdoms where all children were healthy and happy. Sophia slept and woke at irregular intervals, sometimes lucid and conversing, sometimes delirious with fever. Marina did not leave her side for a moment, ignoring hunger and fatigue, focused only on being present for every precious second. When afternoon began to fall and shadows lengthened in the room, Marina knew she had to make a decision. "I have to fix this," she thought, looking at the clock on the wall. Marina took her old cell phone and began calling everyone she knew, begging for help, for a loan, for anything that could save Sophia. Each refusal was like a door closing. Each excuse was another nail in the coffin of hope that she desperately tried to keep open. Her co-workers were all as poor as she was, barely able to support their own families. The church priest said he would start a campaign, but Marina knew they wouldn't raise even a tenth of the necessary amount in 48 hours. She called Sophia's father, who hadn't answered her calls for years, leaving desperate messages on his voicemail. "Please, she is your daughter too. Please help her," she begged into the void. When night fell completely, and the hospital entered that quieter rhythm of the nighttime period, Marina was physically and emotionally exhausted. Sophia slept restlessly, her sleep disturbed by coughing fits and breathing difficulties that made the monitors beep in alarm. Marina held her hand and prayed to a God who seemed to have forgotten them, asking for a miracle, a chance, anything. She thought about stealing, selling herself, doing anything to get the money, but she knew that even these desperate options wouldn't yield enough in time. "Forgive me, Sophia. Forgive your useless mother," she murmured with a broken heart. It was then that Sophia woke up startled, struggling to breathe, her eyes wide in panic while her little hands grasped at the air. Marina panicked and pressed the emergency button repeatedly while trying to calm her daughter. But Sophia was turning more and more purple, her small body desperately fighting for oxygen. Doctors and nurses flooded the room, pushing Marina aside as they worked frantically to stabilize the girl. Marina watched in horror as they increased the oxygen and administered medications, minutes dragging like hours. "Don't take her from me, please, not now," she begged the universe. After what seemed like an eternity, Sophia finally stabilized, her breathing returning to a more regular rhythm, although still labored. The doctor who had spoken with Marina earlier approached her with a grave expression that needed no words to be understood. Sophia was deteriorating faster than expected. Her heart was failing, and without surgery she wouldn't last even the time they had given Marina. The mother felt the floor disappear beneath her feet, the cruel reality imposing itself with brutal force. "How long?" she asked with a dead voice. The doctor hesitated before answering, clearly struggling with the weight of what he had to say. He looked at Sophia, now sedated and breathing with the help of an oxygen mask, and then at Marina, who seemed to have aged years in a matter of hours. The answer came as a heavy whisper that echoed like a scream in Marina's mind. Without the surgery, Sophia had at most a week, perhaps less if there was another crisis like the one that had just happened. Marina felt her legs give way and needed to lean against the wall, her vision darkening at the edges. "A week? My daughter has only a week to live?" she asked, unable to believe her own words. The doctor confirmed with a somber nod and explained they would do everything possible to keep her comfortable, but without cardiac surgery, there was no hope of recovery. Marina looked at Sophia sleeping, so small and vulnerable in that enormous bed, and felt a fierce determination take hold of her. She would not let her daughter leave, no matter what she had to do. Even if she had to move mountains, even if she had to face the impossible, she would find a way. The doctor placed the discharge forms on the small table and said she had a few hours to decide. "I won't sign that, I will find the money," Marina declared with a conviction that she didn't know where it came from. Marina spent the rest of the night by Sophia's side, watching over her restless sleep and desperately planning what to do. She made a mental list of everything she could sell, all the places where she could ask for help, all possibilities no matter how remote they might be. When the sun began to rise, tinting the hospital room with a golden light that seemed to mock her despair, Marina made a decision. She gently kissed Sophia and whispered promises of return in her ear. She had to go to work at the Albuquerque house, ask for an advance, beg if necessary. "Hold on tight, my love, Mommy will find a way," she promised one last time. Marina picked up the discharge forms the doctor had left and looked at them for a long time. The printed words representing the surrender she refused to accept. With a decisive gesture, she tore the papers in half and threw the pieces in the trash, knowing she was buying time she didn't have. She adjusted the blanket over Sophia one last time and left the room with determined steps. In the hallway, she passed the doctor, who observed her with a mixture of pity and admiration. Marina had no money, no resources, no logical hope, but she had something that no force in the world could take from her. "I will get the money for the surgery, doctor. I will save my daughter, keep her in the hospital. A mother's love can move mountains," she thought as she left the hospital to fight for her daughter's life. Marina got off the crowded bus with her legs still trembling from the run she had made from the hospital to the bus stop, her wrinkled and sweaty cleaning uniform sticking to her tired body. The wealthy neighborhood where the Albuquerque mansion was located contrasted brutally with the reality she had left behind, the tree-lined streets and imposing houses seeming to exist on a completely different planet. She stopped at the property's entrance gate and took several deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart and mentally organize the words she would use to ask her employer for help. Her hands were shaking as she touched the intercom, and she needed to wipe the sweat from her forehead before the security camera recorded her in such a deplorable state. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her back, making her feel even more the fatigue of sleepless nights and the desperation she carried. Marina knew this was her last chance, that if she couldn't get help here, Sophia would have no more hope. "Please, God, make Mrs. Helena have compassion today," she murmured while waiting for someone to answer. The metallic voice of the intercom made her jump with fright when someone finally answered, and Marina recognized the bored tone of the gardener who had worked on the property for years but never bothered to learn the names of the other employees. The gate opened with an electronic buzz, and Marina entered, walking along the Portuguese stone path that led to the service entrance, each step echoing like a sentence in her anxious mind. The Albuquerque mansion rose majestically, with its 3 floors of pure luxury and ostentation, the enormous windows reflecting the sun like judgmental eyes watching her approach. Marina had worked there for 3 years, cleaning every room in that house that was worth more than she could earn in several lifetimes, and yet she had never gotten used to the abyss that separated her world from her employer's world. She entered through the back door as she always did, the cold air conditioning making her shiver after the scorching heat of the street. "Marina, you're 2 hours late," shouted the cook's shrill voice from across the kitchen. Marina lowered her head in a silent apology as she rushed to the staff changing room to exchange her sweaty uniform for a clean one, her hands still trembling as she buttoned the white apron she was required to wear. She knew she was late, knew it could cost her job, but there was no way to explain that she had spent the morning almost losing her daughter without seeming like she was making up excuses. The small, stuffy changing room smelled of cleaning products and disinfectant, a smell that had become part of her life as much as the hospital smell of the last few weeks. Marina looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror on the wall and barely recognized the exhausted and desperate woman staring back at her, her eyes sunken and red from crying so much, her face pale and hollowed by worry. She tried to fix her black hair that was escaping from her bun, but her hands were shaking so much that she gave up. "Be strong, Marina. Be strong for Sophia," she said to her own reflection, trying to find courage. Marina grabbed the cleaning cart and began her routine, even though every movement seemed automatic and lifeless, her mind completely focused on how to approach Mrs. Helena about the advance. She passed through the main corridor where expensive paintings decorated the walls, each worth more than Sophia's surgery, and felt bitter revolt rise in her throat. It was unfair that some people had so much while others had so little, that her daughter's life depended on the goodwill of people who spent on frivolities what would save Sophia. Marina cleaned the Italian marble floor with mechanical movements, but her mind was at the hospital, imagining Sophia alone and afraid, waiting for her mother to come back with a solution. The sound of high heels echoing down the hallway pulled her from her daydreams, and she raised her head to see Mrs. Helena descending the main staircase like a queen in her palace. "Mrs. Helena, please, I need to speak with you. It's urgent," Marina called, gathering all her courage. Mrs. Helena stopped midway down the stairs and looked at Marina with an expression of surprise and irritation, as if one of the decorative statues had suddenly come to life and dared to address her. She was a woman in her 50s, artificially maintained young through expensive cosmetic procedures, with perfectly brushed blonde hair and clothes that cost more than Marina's annual salary. She descended the remaining steps slowly, each step calculated to demonstrate her superiority, and stopped at a safe distance from Marina, as if poverty were contagious. Other employees passing through the corridor slowed their pace, curious about what the quiet cleaning lady might want from the boss. Marina felt the weight of all those gazes, but kept her head high, thinking of Sophia to find strength. "What do you want, Marina? And I hope it's important to interrupt me like this," said Mrs. Helena with evident disdain. Marina took a deep breath, and the words began to flow in a desperate torrent, each one carrying the weight of her desperation and urgency. Her hands trembled as she gestured, trying to make Mrs. Helena understand the gravity of the situation, and she could feel tears forming in her eyes but fought to contain them. The other employees had completely stopped what they were doing to watch the scene, some with obvious pity on their faces, others with morbid curiosity about how events would unfold. Marina took the medical documents she had brought from the hospital from her pocket, her hands shaking so much she almost dropped the important papers. The corridor seemed to have gotten smaller, the air thicker as everyone waited for the boss's reaction. "Mrs. Helena, my daughter Sophia is very sick. She needs urgent heart surgery. I have all the documents here, please. I need an advance on my salary, I beg you, said Marina, her voice choked with emotion. Mrs. Helena didn't even bother to take the papers that Marina was holding out, her face closing in an expression of disbelief and disdain that made Marina's heart sink. The boss crossed her arms over her chest, her gold bracelets tinkling with the movement, and took a step back as if Marina had some contagious disease. Marina continued holding out the documents, her arms beginning to ache with the effort. But Mrs. Helena continued to completely ignore the papers. The tension in the air was palpable, everyone present holding their breath while waiting for the boss's response. Marina could feel sweat running down her back, desperation growing with each second of silence. Please, Mrs. Helena, just look at the documents. They're all genuine. From the hospital, my daughter is only 7 years old, Marina begged, her voice breaking at the end. Mrs. Helena gave a cold laugh that echoed through the marble corridor, like the sound of breaking glass, a sound that made Marina flinch as if she had been physically struck. The boss began to walk around Marina like a predator circling its prey, her expensive heels clicking on the polished floor in a threatening rhythm that made Marina's heart race even faster. Marina could smell her expensive perfume, a floral scent that cost more than her monthly food, mixed with the smell of contempt that seemed to emanate from every pore. The other employees watched in tense silence, some looking away, ashamed of the cruelty they were witnessing, but powerless to intervene. Mrs. Helena stopped right in front of Marina and stared at her with eyes cold as ice, a cruel smile playing on her perfectly painted lips. Do you really think I'll fall for this tearful story? People like you always invent these tragedies when you need extra money, said Mrs. Helena loud enough for everyone to hear. Marina felt as if she had been slapped in the face, the humiliation burning more than any physical pain could cause. The tears she had tried to contain began to flow freely down her face, each one carrying away a piece of her dignity. She clutched the medical documents to her chest, as if they could protect her from the cruelty of the words, but nothing could ease the impact of the unjust accusation. Marina had worked honestly for 3 years in that house, had never asked for anything beyond her salary, had never missed work without justification, and now she was accused of lying about her daughter's illness. The injustice of the situation was like acid in her veins, corroding any hope she still maintained. It's not a lie, Mrs. Helena, I have never lied to you. Please, my daughter is very sick. I wouldn't dare lie about this. Marina defended herself between sobs. Mrs. Helena took the documents from Marina's hands with her fingertips, holding them as if they were contaminated trash, and flipped through them superficially with a studied expression of boredom. Marina watched with her heart in her throat, hoping against all logic that seeing the medical tests, the reports about Sophia's critical condition, might awaken some compassion in that stone-hearted woman. But after only a few seconds, Mrs. Helena threw the papers back at Marina with such force that some flew and scattered across the polished floor. Marina quickly bent down to collect the precious documents, her hands trembling as she gathered each paper as if they were fragments of hope. While she was kneeling on the cold floor, she could feel Mrs. Helena's superior gaze upon her, savoring every moment of humiliation. Even if these papers are genuine, which I highly doubt, this is not my problem, Marina, Mrs. Helena declared, with absolute coldness. Marina slowly stood up with the crumpled papers in her hands, her dignity in pieces, but her determination still fighting to survive. She looked around at the other employees, seeking some support, some voice that would rise in her defense, but everyone averted their gaze, afraid of becoming the next target of the mistress's wrath. The cook, who had always been kind to Marina, stepped forward as if to say something, but a cutting look from Mrs. Helena made her immediately retreat. Marina understood in that moment that she was completely alone, that nobody would risk their own job to help her. Even so, she couldn't give up, not when Sophia's life depended on this last attempt. Mrs. Helena, I've worked for you for 3 years, never missed a day, never complained, never asked for anything. Please, just this once, I'll pay everything back, Marina pleaded once more. Mrs. Helena moved even closer to Marina, coming so near that Marina could see every detail of the expensive makeup, covering the imperfections of her face. For a brief moment, there was a glimmer of something in the mistress's eyes that Marina couldn't identify. Perhaps a vestige of humanity struggling to emerge, but it was quickly smothered by the mask of cruelty. "Mrs." Helena raised her chin in a gesture of supreme arrogance, and her next words fell like stones on Marina's already shattered heart. The silence in the hallway was so absolute that one could hear Marina's heavy breathing struggling against sobs. "You want to know the truth, Marina? Even if your daughter were really sick, I wouldn't give a penny to people like you," Mrs. Helena said slowly, savoring each cruel word. The shock of those words was like a punch to Marina's stomach, taking all the air from her lungs and making her stagger backward. She had to lean against the wall to avoid falling, her legs seeming to have turned to jelly. The other employees let out muffled exclamations of horror, clearly shocked by the level of cruelty displayed. Marina couldn't process how someone could be so devoid of compassion, so completely empty of humanity. She looked into Mrs. Helena's eyes, searching for some sign that this was a cruel joke, but found only sadistic satisfaction. The words left her mouth before she could control them, born of a pain so deep that it surpassed fear. "You have no heart," Marina whispered in a dead voice. The words had barely left her mouth when Marina realized the mistake she had made, but it was too late to take back what she had said. "Mrs." Helena's face contorted in anger, turning red despite the heavy makeup, the veins in her neck visibly protruding. The other employees collectively held their breath, knowing that Marina had just sealed her fate. "How dare you speak to me like that? You, an insignificant cleaner, dare to insult me in my own house," shouted Mrs. Helena, her voice trembling with rage. The physical humiliation added to the emotional one was almost unbearable, but Marina thought of Sophia in the hospital, alone and frightened, and found strength not to completely fall apart. The seconds dragged on in tense silence as mistress and employee stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Marina knew she should apologize, beg for forgiveness, but the words simply wouldn't come. "I take back what I said, Mrs. Helena," Marina said slowly, making the mistress momentarily relax. "You are not a person without a heart. You choose to be this way," Marina completed with courage she didn't know she possessed. For a moment, Mrs. Helena seemed to have been struck by lightning, her face going through several different expressions as she processed the even greater insult. Then, she pronounced the words Marina feared most to hear. The sentence came like a falling lightning bolt, cutting not only Marina's job, but her last hope of saving Sophia. Marina felt the world spin around her and needed to hold onto the wall more firmly to avoid fainting. Losing her job meant losing everything, having no way to pay rent, no way to buy food, and definitely no way to get the money for the surgery. "You're fired, Marina. I want you out of my house immediately, and don't you dare ask for references," declared Mrs. Helena with a cutting voice. Marina began to remove her apron with hands that trembled so much she could barely unbutton the buttons. Each movement seemed to happen in slow motion, as if time had decided to prolong her humiliation. She folded the apron carefully, a habit of years that not even desperation could break, and placed it on the cleaning cart that had been her work companion for 3 years. The other employees watched in silence, some with tears in their eyes, but no one dared to intervene. Marina was turning to leave when her elbow hit something, and the unmistakable sound of expensive porcelain breaking filled the air. "No, no, no," Marina screamed as she saw the Chinese vase in pieces on the floor. Marina immediately bent down to try to collect the shards, desperation making her act without thinking, and ended up cutting her hand on a particularly sharp piece. The wound began to drip onto the white marble, mixing with her tears as she frantically tried to gather the pieces impossible to repair. "Mrs." Helena approached slowly, her heels ominously clicking on the floor, and Marina could feel the fury emanating from her in waves. The employer looked at the destroyed vase and then at Marina kneeling among the shards, and a terrible smile formed on her lips. "You did this on purpose. You broke my Ming dynasty vase as revenge," accused Mrs. Helena loudly for everyone to hear. Marina raised her head in shock, still holding some shards in her injured hands, unable to believe she was being accused of something that was clearly an accident. She tried to explain, the words coming out jumbled and desperate. But Mrs. Helena had already constructed her narrative, and nothing Marina said would change that. The employer began to talk about the value of the vase, an astronomical amount that Marina could not pay, even if she worked the rest of her life. The other employees knew it had been an accident. They had all seen it, but fear kept them silent. "It was an accident, Mrs. Helena. I swear on my daughter's life it was an accident. I tripped, please," begged Marina, still on her knees. "Mrs." Helena took out her cell phone and began to calculate aloud how much the vase was worth and how much she would deduct from Marina's last salary, quickly coming to the conclusion that it wouldn't be nearly enough. Marina watched in growing horror as Mrs. Helena typed numbers into her phone, her face lighting up with cruel satisfaction. The situation had completely spiraled out of control, transforming into a nightmare from which Marina couldn't wake up. She tried to stand, but her knees were trembling so much that she had to lean on the nearest piece of furniture. "I'll have to call my lawyers, Marina. You will pay every penny for this vase," said Mrs. Helena with evident satisfaction. It was at that moment that quick footsteps echoed down the stairs, and a young man of about 16 appeared in the hallway. Marina recognized him as the Albuquerque's son, a spoiled teenager whom she had seen few times but who always treated her as if she were invisible. He stopped upon seeing the scene, his eyes scanning the broken vase, Marina in a deplorable state and his mother with the cell phone in her hand. A malicious smile formed on his face, and Marina felt a shiver run down her spine, sensing that something even worse was about to happen. The young man approached his mother and whispered something in her ear that Marina couldn't hear. "What are you saying, son?" asked Mrs. Helena with sudden interest. The teenager straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Marina with an expression of fake concern that wouldn't fool even a child. He ran his hand through his perfectly combed blonde hair, a studied gesture he had learned from his father, and his next words fell like bombs in the already tense environment. Marina couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was too surreal, too cruel even for this heartless family. She shook her head in denial before he even finished speaking, but she could see that Mrs. Helena was already believing every word. "Mother, I was listening to the argument down here and decided to review the security cameras upstairs and saw Marina leaving your room with something in her hands. It looked like jewelry," said the young man with false innocence. Marina felt her blood freeze in her veins as she processed the completely fabricated accusation. She had never entered Mrs. Helena's room without supervision, had never touched anything except to clean it, and had certainly never stolen anything. The lie was so absurd that for a moment Marina thought Mrs. Helena would see through it, but the gleam in her employer's eyes showed that she had found the perfect excuse to completely destroy Marina. Marina tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak, the shock robbing her of the ability to form coherent words. "No, that's a lie. I never did that. Never," she finally managed to say, in a high-pitched voice of desperation. "Mrs." Helena was already dialing another number on her phone, and Marina recognized with horror that she was calling the police. The employer spoke with an authoritative voice, giving the address and explaining that she had caught an employee stealing valuable jewelry from her house. Marina heard the words as if she was submerged in water, everything sounding distorted and unreal. The other employees moved away from her as if she had a contagious disease, no one wanting to be associated with an alleged thief. Marina felt her legs giving way and had to sit on the floor, ignoring the pieces of the vase that were still scattered around. "Please, Mrs. Helena, this will destroy me. I will never be able to get another job. My daughter won't survive," she begged, no longer caring about dignity. Young Albuquerque approached Marina with calculated steps, crouching near her with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. Marina could smell his expensive perfume, probably costing more than she earned in a month, and his proximity made her instinctively shrink back. He tilted his head as if examining an interesting insect, and Marina had never felt so small and insignificant. The words that came out of his mouth next were spoken in a low voice, just for her to hear, and confirmed her worst fears. "Do you know, Marina, I always thought that you poor people should know your place, and you dared to speak ill of my mother," he whispered with venom in his voice. Marina understood in that moment that everything had been orchestrated, that the young man had invented the lie about the theft specifically to destroy her for having dared to confront Mrs. Helena. The pure and calculated malice of a teenager who had never known hardship in life was more terrifying than the impulsive cruelty of the mother. Marina looked into his eyes, searching for some trace of humanity, some spark of compassion, but found only emptiness and cruel satisfaction. She thought of Sophia in the hospital, probably waking up from a nightmare to discover that her mother had not yet returned, and despair consumed her completely. "Please don't do this, my daughter is sick, she needs me," Marina begged the young man, abandoning any pretense of pride. The sound of approaching sirens made Marina's heart stop for a moment before starting to beat frantically. The police were coming, and she would be accused of theft, would be arrested, booked, and even when she proved her innocence, the stain on her name would prevent her from getting any decent job. Sophia would be left alone in the hospital while she was imprisoned for a crime she didn't commit. Marina tried to stand up, thinking of fleeing, but her legs wouldn't obey, and she fell to her knees again. "Mrs." Helena watched everything with evident satisfaction, savoring every moment of Marina's destruction. "The police are coming, Marina. I hope this serves as a lesson," said Mrs. Helena with an icy voice. Tears streamed uncontrollably down Marina's face. The other employees looked away, unable to bear witnessing such humiliation, but Marina no longer cared about witnesses. All that mattered was Sophia. Only Sophia. "Please, Mrs. Helena, I'll do anything. I'll work for free for the rest of my life, but don't do this. My daughter needs me," sobbed Marina. Mrs. Helena moved away from Marina with evident disgust. Marina could hear the heavy footsteps of the police officers climbing the stairs, the sound of radios crackling, authoritative voices approaching. Her time was up. In a matter of seconds, she would be handcuffed and taken away like a criminal, and Sophia's last hope would be lost right there. "Mother, I think she also took some important documents from Father's office," added young Albuquerque, adding one more lie to the pile. The police officers entered the hallway, two large men in dark uniforms who looked at the scene with professional expressions. Marina, crying desperately, looking exactly like what Mrs. Helena wanted her to look like, an unbalanced employee who had been caught stealing and tried to destroy property out of revenge. One of the police officers approached her cautiously, while the other spoke with Mrs. Helena, writing down her version of events. Marina tried to speak, tried to explain, but her voice was nothing more than a hoarse whisper that nobody bothered to hear. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," said the officer, extending the handcuffs. Marina looked one last time at Mrs. Helena and her son, seeing in them not people but demons in human form, soulless creatures who destroy lives for fun. She thought of Sophia, alone in the hospital, waiting for a mother who wouldn't return, a surgery that wouldn't happen, a life that wouldn't be lived. The despair was so absolute, but Sophia's face in her mind kept her conscious. As the officer approached with the handcuffs, Marina made one final desperate plea. "Please let me call the hospital. My daughter is sick. She needs to know where I am," she begged the officers. That's when the elevator at the end of the hallway opened and an unexpected figure emerged, making everyone in the corridor turn. Marina didn't immediately recognize the person through her tears, but there was something different in Mrs. Helena's posture that suggested something significant was about to happen. The silence that followed was charged with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes. Marina remained on the floor without strength to stand up, without hope of salvation, just waiting for the nightmare to end one way or another. "What is happening here?" asked a deep, authoritative voice that Marina didn't recognize. The figure that emerged from the elevator was Mr. Albuquerque, the owner of the house who had returned early from his business trip. Marina recognized him immediately, a 60-year-old man with impeccable gray hair and a suit that cost more than she would earn in a decade. He observed the scene with analytical eyes, Marina crying, the police officers with handcuffs in hand, the destroyed vase, his wife and son with poorly disguised expressions of satisfaction. His presence commanded immediate respect, and even the police officers seemed to hesitate to continue the procedure without his approval. Mr. Albuquerque walked slowly to the center of the confusion, his Italian shoes clicking on the marble with authority. "Helena, explain to me exactly what is happening here," he ordered, in a controlled but clearly irritated voice. Mrs. Helena immediately began her rehearsed narrative, gesturing dramatically, as she described how Marina had been insolent, deliberately broken the vase, and according to her son, had stolen jewelry from the master bedroom. Marina observed Mr. Albuquerque as he listened, his face remaining impassive, impossible to read his true intentions or thoughts. When Mrs. Helena finished her version of events, he turned to his teenage son, who repeated his lie about having seen Marina on the security cameras. The young man spoke with confidence, clearly accustomed to having his words accepted without question, but Marina noticed a small hesitation when his father looked directly at him. Mr. Albuquerque then looked at Marina, still fallen on the floor, and something in his gaze was different from the contempt she was used to receiving. "Marina, how long have you been working in our house?" he asked with studied neutrality. Marina tried to speak, but her throat was dry and rough from crying, and she had to swallow several times before she could form words. She knew this might be her only chance to defend herself, but she also knew that the word of a maid would never be worth more than the family's. Even so, she had to try for Sophia, always for Sophia, who was passing away while she was here being accused of crimes she didn't commit. She looked directly at Mr. Albuquerque, ignoring the furious glances from Mrs. Helena and her son. 3 years, sir. I've worked here for 3 years and I've never taken anything that wasn't mine, I swear on my daughter's life," Marina replied with a hoarse but firm voice. Mr. Albuquerque nodded and turned to his son, his eyes narrowing in a way that made the teenager step back involuntarily. There was something in the dynamic between father and son that Marina had never noticed before, a tension suggesting that Mr. Albuquerque knew all too well about his heir's malicious tendencies. He walked to the hallway table, where the internal monitoring system was located, and typed some commands on the tablet that controlled the cameras. The screen showed the day's recordings, and he quickly went through the records, looking for the moment his son had mentioned. The silence in the hallway was oppressive, everyone waiting for the verdict that would come from the images. "Interesting, son. I don't see Marina entering our room at any point today," said Mr. Albuquerque in a dangerously low voice. The young Albuquerque's face lost all color, transforming into a mask of poorly disguised panic as he stammered, trying to explain that he must have been confused about the dates. Donna Helena tried to intervene, saying that the cameras might be defective, but her husband silenced her with a cutting gesture of his hand. He continued reviewing the recordings, now focusing on the moment when the vase was broken, and the image clearly showed Marina accidentally tripping on the piece. Marina felt a small spark of hope born in her chest, but she knew that even if proven innocent of theft and intentional breakage, she had still lost her job. Mr. Albuquerque turned to the police with an apologetic expression. "Officers, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Clearly there was an error in interpreting the facts," he said with authority. The officers seemed relieved not to have to arrest anyone and quickly put away the handcuffs, muttering something about unnecessary reports before withdrawing. Donna Helena was livid, her face red with anger and humiliation at having been contradicted in front of the employees, but she didn't dare confront her husband openly. The young man had retreated near his mother, completely avoiding his father's penetrating gaze. Marina, seeing Mr. Albuquerque's compassion, felt a small spark of hope in her heart and decided she wouldn't lose her daughter out of pride. "Mr. Albuquerque, I've never asked for anything before, but my daughter is sick, please, I beg you," said Marina with renewed tears streaming down her face. Mr. Albuquerque looked at his wife with an expression Marina had never seen before. It was disappointment mixed with something that looked like disgust. He then checked something on his cell phone, probably confirming Marina's payment history, her attendance, her impeccable record until that day. Mr. Albuquerque remained silent for long moments, clearly processing the entire situation, weighing his options. Marina could see Donna Helena frantically gesturing to her husband, trying to influence his decision without speaking aloud. "Marina, I'm sorry about what happened here today, but understand that I cannot undermine my wife's authority in front of the staff," he finally said, and Marina's heart sank. Marina felt her last hopes drain away like water between her fingers, and she needed to lean against the wall to avoid falling again. Even Mr. Albuquerque, who seemed to have some compassion, chose domestic politics over a child's life. She nodded in understanding, no longer having the strength to argue or plead. Mr. Albuquerque handed her an envelope that Marina recognized as her final payment, but she could feel by the weight that there was nothing extra there. "Good luck, Marina. I'm sorry about your daughter," he said at last, which sounded like an epitaph for Sophia's hopes. Marina took the envelope and walked toward the door, each step echoing like a funeral bell in her mind. The other employees watched her leave with expressions of pity and relief. Pity for her situation, relief for not being in her place. When she reached the door, Marina turned one last time and looked at the Albuquerque family. The patriarch with his limited compassion, the matriarch with her unlimited cruelty, and the heir with his learned malice. They would continue their lives of luxury and comfort, while Sophia would depart, and they wouldn't lose a night's sleep over it. Marina left through the service door for the last time, the late afternoon sun hitting her bruised face. "God, if you exist, please show me a path," she murmured to the darkening sky. Marina returned to the hospital that night with the envelope containing her final salary, knowing it would barely cover Sophia's medications for a few more days, let alone the surgery. She spent the night by her daughter's side, watching over her increasingly restless sleep, memorizing every detail of her little face in case these were their last hours together. The nurses passed by periodically, casting compassionate glances at Marina, knowing that time was running out. Sophia would wake sporadically, always seeking her mother's hand, always finding it there, firm and warm, despite the desperation consuming Marina inside. When the sun rose, Marina made a decision. She would sell everything she had, even her clothes if necessary. "Mommy will find a way, my love. Mommy promises," she whispered to the sleeping Sophia. The next morning, Marina left the hospital with a bag containing her few valuable possessions: a watch that had belonged to her mother, some silver earrings, an old but working radio, even her better clothes that she could sell at thrift stores. Her clothes from the day before were still torn and stained with blood from the cuts, but she had no way to change them. People on the street looked at her with a mixture of disgust and pity, avoiding her path as if poverty and despair were contagious. Marina set up a small display of her belongings on a busy downtown corner, begging passers-by to buy something, anything. Hours passed and very few people stopped, and those who did offered ridiculous prices. "Please, it's to save my daughter," Marina repeated like a mantra, but the city remained deaf to her desperation. While Marina struggled to sell her last possessions on the downtown streets, on the other side of the city, in an exclusive club for millionaires, Roberto Saldana was having his imported breakfast while discussing philosophy with his longtime friend. Roberto was a 65-year-old man who had built an empire from nothing, but lately felt increasingly disillusioned with humanity. His friend, another successful businessman, argued that the world had become irreversibly cruel and selfish, that genuine kindness was a relic of the past. Roberto, always the stubborn optimist, vehemently disagreed, insisting that there were still good people in the world, people who helped others without expecting anything in return. The discussion intensified until Roberto, in a characteristic impulse, made a proposal. "I'll prove you wrong. I'll disguise myself as a beggar, and we'll see how many good people still exist. I'll pay a fortune to anyone who has a truly good heart," he declared, slamming his hand on the table. His friend laughed at the proposal, finding absurd the idea that Roberto, with his distinguished appearance and naturally authoritative bearing, could pass for a convincing beggar. But Roberto was known for his stubbornness, and when he decided something, nothing could dissuade him. They established the terms of the bet. Roberto would spend the day disguised as a beggar on the streets, and if at least one person showed genuine kindness without expecting a reward, his friend would donate $1 million to a charity of Roberto's choice. If no one helped, Roberto would admit humanity was lost, and would himself donate the $1 million to a cynical institution of his friend's choosing. Roberto went home and, with the reluctant help of his driver, completely transformed himself. Torn and dirty clothes, a disheveled fake beard, strategic dirt on his face and hands. "Mr. Roberto, this is madness. You could get hurt on the street," protested the concerned driver. Roberto ignored the protests and instructed the driver to drop him off in a busy downtown area and return to pick him up at the end of the day. He strategically chose a spot where many people passed by. Hurried professionals, street vendors, tourists, a true sample of society. Roberto positioned himself on the sidewalk, hunched and trembling as he had observed real beggars do, and began his social experiment. The first hours were devastating to his optimism. People passed by in a hurry, some throwing looks of disgust, others simply ignoring him as if he were invisible. He tried to ask for help, water, food, anything, but it was like talking to the wind. One businessman even threatened him when he got too close. Perhaps my friend is right. Perhaps kindness really is gone, thought Roberto with growing disillusionment. Marina had managed to sell only a few pieces for ridiculous amounts and was walking downtown with the little money she had gathered. It didn't even reach 0.1% needed for the surgery. She was exhausted, hadn't eaten anything since the day before, and the water she carried in her bottle was hot from the scorching sun. The sandwich in her bag was her only meal of the day, saved for when hunger became unbearable. Her feet hurt in worn-out shoes, yesterday's cut still throbbing under improvised bandages. Marina stopped at a public drinking fountain, but it was broken, like so many other things in the city. That's when she saw the old beggar collapsed on the sidewalk, apparently having fainted, while dozens of people passed by him as if he were trash. "My God, someone help him," Marina muttered, looking around at the indifferent crowd. Marina knew she had no time to lose, that every minute away from the hospital was 1 minute less with Sophia, but something in her heart wouldn't allow her to simply walk by like everyone else. She approached the fallen man, noticing his irregular breathing and the paleness beneath the dirt. Marina knelt beside him, ignoring the disapproving glances from people who clearly thought she was wasting time with a homeless man. She gently touched his shoulder, trying to wake him, and when he opened his eyes, Marina saw in them a depth of surprise that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Without thinking twice, she took her water bottle, the last one she had, and offered it to him. "Sir, drink slowly, you're dehydrated," Marina said, helping him sit up. Roberto accepted the water with hands that trembled, not from weakness but from emotion. After hours of being treated as less than human, this woman, clearly in a precarious situation, was offering the little she had. He drank slowly as she had instructed, discreetly observing her. The torn clothes stained with blood, the face marked by fatigue and despair, the hands with improvised bandages. This was not someone who could afford to help others, but there she was, kneeling on the dirty sidewalk beside him. Roberto noticed the bag with a few things that seemed to be for sale and the small wad of bills that would barely fill a hand. "Thank you, miss, but you seem to need this water more than I do," he said in a hoarse voice, maintaining his disguise. Marina shook her head and forced a gentle smile that didn't reach her tired eyes, continuing to help him while people hurried past around them. She took the sandwich from her bag, the only food she would have that day, and offered it to the man without hesitation. Roberto was momentarily speechless. This woman, who was clearly going through her own hell, was offering her only food to a stranger. He accepted the sandwich but broke it in half, insisting that she keep half, and something in his tone didn't accept refusal. Marina reluctantly accepted her half, and they ate in silence for a few moments, two strangers sharing a humble meal on an indifferent sidewalk. "Why are you helping me? You clearly have your own problems," Roberto asked, genuinely curious. Marina looked at him with eyes that carried the weight of the world and responded with devastating simplicity that deeply touched Roberto. She explained that her pain wouldn't diminish, knowing another human being was suffering, that people's indifference wouldn't make her one of them. Marina said that her daughter was in the hospital and always said that helping others made the heart lighter, even when everything seemed lost. Roberto felt a lump form in his throat. Here was living proof that kindness still existed, and it came from the person who could least afford to be kind. He wanted to reveal his identity immediately, wanted to help her, but something made him hesitate. "Your daughter must be very proud to have a mother like you," he said with a choked voice. The words made Marina's eyes fill with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, mumbling something about Sophia being her only reason to keep fighting. She helped Roberto to his feet, surprised that he was stronger than he appeared, and guided him to a nearby bench in the square. During the journey, she kept talking to him, treating him with dignity that no one else had shown that day. Roberto observed how other people looked at them with contempt, two outcasts of society supporting each other. When they reached the bench, Marina made sure he was comfortable before checking her old cell phone. "Do you have somewhere to go? Do you know any shelters in the area?" she asked, genuinely concerned. Roberto was formulating an answer when he saw Marina's face completely transform as she answered the phone that began to ring. All color drained from her face as she listened to the voice on the other end, and Roberto could partially hear the urgent tone of the caller. Marina began to shake violently, the phone almost falling from her hands as she stammered desperate questions. Roberto instinctively stood up to support her when it seemed she might faint. The words that came out of her mouth next were like daggers in the air. No, she was stable when I left." "How long? 24 hours? But the doctor said we had more time," Marina shouted into the phone. Marina hung up the phone and collapsed on the bench, violent sobs shaking her entire body, while Roberto watched without knowing how to console her. She turned to him with wild eyes of desperation and began to speak hurriedly about Sophia, about the surgery, about how she had lost her job trying to get money. Roberto listened in growing shock as the story unfolded. This woman who had stopped to help him was living a nightmare that would make anyone lose faith in humanity. But instead of becoming bitter and cruel, she still found room in her heart to help an unknown beggar. Marina suddenly grabbed his hands, not caring about the dirt. "I'm sorry, sir, sorry for dumping this on you. I need to go, my daughter needs me," she said, getting up abruptly. Roberto also stood up, finally decided to reveal his identity and help her, but Marina was already walking away, practically running. He tried to call her, but his voice was lost in the noise of traffic and the city. Marina turned briefly, waved goodbye to him, and then disappeared into the crowd. Roberto tried to follow her, but the disguise of an elderly beggar hindered him, and in seconds he had completely lost sight of her. He stood in the middle of the sidewalk, people hurrying around him, still holding half of the sandwich she had shared. "Wait, I can help. Come back," he shouted, but it was too late. Roberto quickly called his driver, ordering him to come immediately, but the downtown traffic would make it time-consuming. He tried asking street vendors if they knew the woman who had been with him, but no one paid attention to a beggar asking questions. The desperation he felt was different from anything he had experienced. He had the power to save that child, to reward the purest kindness he had witnessed in decades, but had no way to find Marina. He didn't know her full name, didn't know which hospital Sophia was in, had no way to track her. "My God, what have I done? I let her go," muttered Roberto, tearing off his fake beard in frustration. When the driver finally arrived, Roberto got into the car already giving frantic orders to search all public hospitals in the city. He called his contacts, mobilized his security team, offered a reward for any information about a woman matching Marina's description who had a daughter named Sophia in the hospital. But the city was huge. There were dozens of hospitals, hundreds of children hospitalized. Without a full name, without documents, without a photo, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Roberto spent the rest of the day coordinating searches, but when the sun set, he still had no clue. What was her name? Marina. What? Why didn't I ask? He reproached himself for the 1,000th time. Roberto returned home that night with a heavy heart, the victory of the bet completely meaningless in the face of what he had witnessed. His friend called to know the result, and Roberto told him about Marina, about her inexplicable kindness amid her own suffering. His friend was silent for long moments before saying he would make the promised donation and also help search for Marina. Roberto stayed awake all night, the image of Marina crying desperately etched in his mind. He thought about how cruel life was. He had infinite resources to help. She had infinite need for help, but the universe had conspired to keep them apart. "Marina, where are you? How can I find you?" he asked the silent night. On the other side of the city, Marina ran through the hospital corridors, still breathless from the desperate run from downtown to there. Sophia was in critical condition. The doctors had managed to stabilize her temporarily, but made it clear that without surgery in the next 24 hours, there would be nothing more they could do. Marina held Sophia's small hand, feeling how weak her grip was, seeing the bluish tone on her lips that no longer disappeared even with oxygen. Nurses came and went, casting pitying glances that said everything they dared not speak. Marina thought of the old beggar she had helped, hoping he had found shelter for the night. "If I had known it was our last day together, I would have spent every second with you," whispered Marina to unconscious Sophia. The night dragged on in an agony of minutes that seemed like hours, each difficult breath of Sophia's being counted as potentially the last. Marina didn't leave her side for a moment, not even to eat or drink, as if her constant presence could somehow keep death away. She sang softly the songs Sophia loved, told stories about the future they wouldn't have, made promises she couldn't keep. When the first rays of sun came through the hospital window, Marina knew she had reached the end of the line. In a few hours, doctors would come with discharge papers, and she would have to take Sophia home, unable to save her. "Forgive me, my love, Mommy failed you," cried Marina over her daughter's fragile body. Roberto Saldana hadn't slept at all during the night, his eyes burning with fatigue, as he reviewed for the 10th time the security camera footage that his team had managed to access. His office on the top floor of the tallest building in the city had transformed into a command center, with multiple screens showing different angles of the downtown streets. At his side, his head of security and 3 assistants worked frantically, tracking the path that Marina had taken after leaving him in the square. Roberto had mobilized all his resources, calling in favors from contacts in the government and police, determined to find that woman who had restored his faith in humanity. The images were grainy, and Marina appeared for only seconds on each camera, but slowly they were assembling her route. "Mr. Saldana, we managed to track her to the eastern region. She boarded a bus heading toward Central Hospital," said the head of security, pointing to a screen. Roberto immediately grabbed his phone and began calling his contacts at Central Hospital. But it was too early and only the night staff was on duty. He ordered his cars and entire team to be prepared, as they would go to the hospital immediately. While descending in the elevator, Roberto thought about how cruel fate had been. He had spent the whole night looking for Marina in private hospitals, never imagining that someone in such a desperate situation would be in the precarious public system. His driver was already waiting with the car running, and Roberto got in, ordering him to drive as fast as possible within the law. The city was beginning to wake up, the still light traffic allowing them to advance quickly through the avenues. Roberto obsessively checked his watch, calculating how many hours had passed since Marina received that desperate phone call. "Faster, Carlos, a life depends on our speed," he ordered the driver urgently. While Roberto raced against time to find her, Marina was in the hospital corridor, having the most difficult conversation of her life with Sophia's doctor. He had arrived early to check on the girl's condition, and his somber expression said everything before he even opened his mouth. Sophia had deteriorated drastically during the night, her little heart struggling to keep beating, and the medications were no longer having any effect. Marina held the hospital discharge papers with trembling hands, unable to sign her name on that document that was practically a death sentence. The doctor nervously adjusted his glasses while carefully choosing his words. "Mrs. Marina? Sophia is no longer responding to treatment. If we don't operate in the next few hours, there will be nothing more we can do," said the doctor with genuine regret. Marina dropped the papers on the floor and ran back to Sophia's room, finding her daughter even paler, the monitors showing increasingly weak vital signs. She held Sophia's cold little hand, feeling how weak her pulse was, as if life was literally slipping through her fingers. Nurses constantly came in and out, checking equipment, adjusting medications, but Marina could see in their faces that they were just prolonging the inevitable. Her lips trembled when she leaned over her daughter, trying to transmit strength through her presence. "Sophia, my love, hold on just a little longer. Mommy will find a way. Mommy always finds a way," whispered Marina with growing desperation. It was then that 2 hospital administrative employees entered the room with professional and cold expressions that Marina had learned to fear. The taller one, a middle-aged man with a supervisor badge, cleared his throat before speaking, clearly uncomfortable with what he had to do. Marina already knew what was coming before he even opened his mouth, but still the words hit her like physical blows. The man looked at the papers in his hands and then at Marina. "Ma'am, the deadline has expired, and we need to free up this bed for other critical patients on the waiting list. You need to sign the discharge papers now," he said, trying to maintain a professional tone. Marina positioned herself between them and Sophia's bed, her maternal instincts transforming her desperation into fierce determination. She gripped the hospital bed rails so tightly that her knuckles turned white, planting herself as a human barrier between her daughter and those men. The second employee, younger and clearly a novice, tried to approach, but Marina stared at him with such ferocity that he backed away. The tension in the small room was palpable, and Marina could feel her heart beating so hard it seemed like it would explode. "You'll have to drag me out of here. I won't let you take my daughter. She needs to stay in the hospital," Marina shouted, her voice hoarse with desperation. The situation quickly escalated when staff called hospital security, and Marina found herself surrounded by 3 uniformed guards who clearly didn't want to be there. One of them, a grey-haired gentleman who probably had grandchildren, approached with his hands raised in a pacifying gesture. His voice was gentle but firm when he spoke, and Marina could see the conflict in his eyes between duty and compassion. "Ma'am, please, we don't want to have to remove you, but you need to cooperate. We're just following orders," said the older guard with evident regret. Marina shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face, as she clung even tighter to Sophia's bed. Other patients and family members in the hallway had stopped to watch the scene, some filming with cell phones, others murmuring indignantly about the cruelty of the system. An elderly lady who was hospitalized in the room next door shouted from the corridor that what they were doing was a disgrace. Marina took advantage of the momentary distraction to better position herself, practically embracing the hospital bed. "Please don't do this, you can't do this," Marina shouted to anyone who would listen. Roberto finally arrived at Central Hospital with his entourage of 3 executive cars that completely contrasted with the precarious environment of the community hospital. He jumped out of the car before it had completely stopped, running to the main entrance with an energy that belied his 65 years. His assistants ran behind him, carrying tablets and documents, while the head of security cleared a path through the people crowded at the entrance. Roberto stopped at the information desk, his imposing presence and expensive clothes immediately drawing attention. The receptionist, a tired woman who had seen it all in that job, was momentarily speechless. "I need to find a patient named Sophia. She's 7 years old, hospitalized here. Her mother's name is Marina," Roberto said with urgent authority. The receptionist began typing on the old computer, but the system was slow, and there were several Sophias hospitalized. She looked at Roberto apologetically while checking each record, trying to cross-reference the information with the little he had provided. Roberto impatiently tapped his fingers on the counter, while his assistants tried to help by providing more details. That's when screams echoed from the upper floor, a commotion that made several people run to see what was happening. "Sir, there's some confusion on the 3rd floor. It seems they're trying to remove a child," said a nurse who ran past. Roberto had a terrible feeling and, without waiting for the receptionist, ran for the stairs, ignoring the slow elevators. His assistants tried to keep up with him, but Roberto climbed the steps 2 at a time, driven by an inexplicable urgency. His Italian shoes echoed on the concrete stairs as he climbed. When he reached the 3rd floor, the scene he found confirmed his worst fears. Marina was being taken away by security guards while she begged, "Let her go! I'll pay for everything. I'm Roberto Saldana," he shouted from the end of the corridor with all the strength of his lungs. Marina was being taken away by 2 security guards, trying to return to Sophia's room. She managed to break free momentarily and ran back, but they detained her again before she could reach the door. Roberto ran toward them, his assistants finally catching up with bank documents and proof of funds in hand. The confusion was total, with hospital staff paralyzed, not understanding who this man was. One guard was holding Marina, while the other turned to Roberto. "Sir, please don't get involved. This is an internal hospital matter," said the guard, trying to maintain control of the situation. That's when a sharp sound cut through the air, the alarm of a cardiac monitor in emergency code. The nurse ran out of Sophia's room with a panicked expression, shouting to the corridor full of onlookers. All the blood drained from Marina's face when she heard the words she feared most. "Cardiac arrest in room 312. Call the resuscitation team now," the nurse shouted desperately. Marina began to cry. She ran to the room where a medical team was already surrounding Sophia, initiating resuscitation procedures. Roberto arrived right behind her, seeing the small, motionless figure in the bed while doctors worked frantically. Marina tried to approach, but was gently restrained by a nurse. Roberto immediately addressed the responsible physician who was coordinating the resuscitation. "Doctor, I am Roberto Saldanha. I'll pay any amount. Save this child. Do the surgery now," Roberto shouted over the chaos. The doctor briefly looked at Roberto without stopping the chest compressions, quickly processing who this man was. Everyone knew the name Roberto Saldanha. Between compression counts, he shouted orders to his team without losing rhythm. His fingers continued the vital movement while he spoke. "Prepare operating room 5 immediately. If we can bring her back, we're going straight to the surgical center," the doctor ordered without stopping the procedure. Roberto's assistants were already in action, one running to administration with documents, another transferring money on his phone, the third filling out forms at record speed. Marina had fallen to her knees beside the door, her hands joined in prayer as she watched the doctors fight for her daughter's life. The minutes dragged on, each second without response from Sophia, feeling like an eternity. The doctor administered another dose of adrenaline, sweat running down his forehead. "Come on, little one, come back to your mother. Come on, you can do it," the doctor murmured as he continued compressions. Roberto knelt beside Marina, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder as she fidgeted nervously. Marina recognized him through her tears, the beggar from the square, but transformed, dressed in expensive clothes, clearly someone powerful. She grabbed his hand with desperate force, her nails digging into his skin without either of them noticing. Tears flowed freely down her face as she alternated between praying and begging. "You, weren't you the beggar? How can you help? You know what, it doesn't matter, just please save my daughter, please, she's all I have," Marina sobbed, squeezing his hand. Roberto squeezed her hand back, trying to transmit strength and hope through his touch. He kept his eyes fixed on the medical team, mentally counting each compression, each dose of medication. After what seemed like an eternity, one of the monitors emitted a different beep. There was a heart rhythm. The team worked a few more moments to stabilize the rhythm, while everyone in the room held their breath. "We have a pulse, it's weak, but it's there. Prepare for immediate transport," the doctor shouted with renewed urgency. The lead doctor quickly turned to Roberto and Marina as the team prepared Sophia for transport. His coat was soaked with sweat and his hands trembled slightly from adrenaline, but his voice was firm and clear. He looked directly into Marina's eyes first, then at Roberto. "She's back but extremely unstable. We need to operate immediately or we'll lose her again. Do you authorize the procedure?" the doctor asked urgently. Roberto responded immediately, his voice cutting through any hesitation that might exist. He stood up, helping Marina to do the same, and faced the doctor with absolute determination. His assistants approached with the necessary documents already prepared. "Yes, do everything necessary. My assistants will take care of all documentation and payment. Save this girl," Roberto ordered with authority. Marina tried to follow the stretcher when they began moving Sophia, but her legs gave way after so many hours of tension. Roberto supported her, practically carrying her as they followed the medical team. Sophia looked so small and pale on the stretcher, surrounded by equipment and tubes, that she resembled a porcelain doll about to break. When they reached the doors of the surgical center, the head nurse gently raised her hand. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait out here. We'll take good care of her," the nurse said compassionately. Marina managed to break free from Roberto's support and quickly leaned over Sophia, kissing her cold forehead and whispering with a voice trembling with emotion. Tears dripped onto her daughter's pale little face as Marina caressed her hair one last time before surgery. "Mommy loves you, Sophia. Be strong. Mommy is here waiting. Come back to me, my love," Marina whispered before the doors closed. The doors of the surgical center closed with a definitive sound, leaving Marina and Roberto in the waiting corridor. Marina collapsed onto a hard plastic chair, her body finally giving in to the accumulated fatigue of days without proper sleep or food. Roberto sat beside her, watching her with concern. She stared at him with red, swollen eyes from crying so much. "Why did you do this? Why did you disguise yourself as a beggar? Why did you help me?" Marina asked with a hoarse, confused voice. Roberto took a deep breath and began his explanation, his calm voice contrasting with the chaos they had just experienced. He looked at his own hands while speaking, occasionally raising his eyes to Marina. I made a bet with a friend, Marina. A bet that genuine kindness still existed in the world, so I disguised myself as a beggar to prove my point. Spent hours being ignored and mistreated, until you appeared, Roberto explained slowly. Marina listened in a state of shock, processing each word while silent tears continued to run down her face. The irony of the situation was devastating. She had lost everything trying to get help from rich people who despised her. Roberto continued telling about his desperate search during the night. I spent the whole night looking for you, mobilized my entire team, accessed security cameras, but you had disappeared into the crowd. I only managed to find you because we tracked your path to here, Roberto continued. The hours of surgery dragged on with torturous slowness. Roberto had sent an assistant to get food and water, but Marina couldn't swallow anything. He remained there with her, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking. In a moment of quietness, Roberto revealed something deeply personal. I lost a daughter 30 years ago, Marina. She was Sophia's age when I lost her in a car accident. Helping your daughter is also a way to honor her memory, Roberto confessed with a choked voice. Marina took his hand, squeezing it with silent gratitude. They stayed like this for a moment, two strangers united by tragedy and hope. Roberto's assistants came and went, bringing updates about the arrangements. One of them approached discreetly. Mr. Saldana, the best private room in the hospital is prepared. We've brought specialists from abroad and the bill is fully paid, the assistant informed in a low voice. Marina shook her head, still trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. She looked at Roberto with humility and gratitude mixed in her tired expression. Her words came out in a hoarse whisper. You didn't need to do all this. You've already saved her life. That's more than I could dream of, Marina said humbly. Roberto firmly shook his head, turning to face her directly. His eyes showed a determination that Marina hadn't seen before, mixed with something that seemed to be admiration. He took both her hands in his. Marina, you gave me something that no money can buy. You restored my faith in humanity, showed me that genuine kindness still exists in this world. Ensuring that Sophia has all the care she needs is the least I can do, Roberto declared with conviction. They were absorbed in conversation when the door to the surgical center opened. The surgeon appeared, removing his mask and revealing an expression that Marina couldn't decipher. She stood up so quickly she almost fainted, Roberto having to hold her. The doctor approached, still in surgical clothes. How is she? Did the surgery work? Is my daughter alive? Marina asked in a desperate burst. The doctor finally smiled, the kind of smile doctors reserve for moments of victory after long battles. He gently placed his hand on Marina's shoulder before speaking, his voice showing professional satisfaction and personal relief. The surgery was a success, Marina. It was extremely complex due to her critical condition, but Sophia is a warrior. She's going to the ICU now, where she'll be monitored for the next 48 hours, the doctor announced with contained joy. Marina collapsed in Roberto's arms, crying with relief while her entire body trembled. The doctor continued explaining the medical details with patience. Her heart responded very well to the procedure. The next hours are critical, but I'm optimistic. She has excellent chances of complete recovery with proper care, the doctor added, smiling. Marina composed herself enough to speak, her hands still trembling as she wiped away the tears that wouldn't stop falling. She looked at the doctor with pleading eyes full of renewed hope. Can I see her? Please, I need to see my daughter. I need to see that she's alive, Marina begged, still sobbing. The doctor nodded affirmatively, his face showing complete understanding of the maternal desperation he had witnessed. He gestured for them to follow as he explained what they would find. In a few minutes you can see her in the ICU, the doctor said gently. While they waited, Roberto made a quick call and then turned to Marina with a serious expression. He chose his words carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her with too much information at once. His assistants maintained a respectful distance as he spoke. Marina, I've prepared not only the payment for the surgery, but I've established a complete fund for Sophia with a few million, and besides that, I'm transferring 10 million more to your personal account. You'll never have to worry about money again, and if you want to work, there's an executive position waiting for you in one of my companies, Roberto announced calmly. Marina almost fainted upon hearing the amounts, needing to lean against the wall for support. She tried to protest, but Roberto gently interrupted her, his voice firm but affectionate. He held her shoulders lightly, making her look into his eyes as he spoke. "It's not charity, Marina, it's the fortune I promised to give to the kind person who would stop to help me. You proved that kindness exists when you had every reason in the world to be bitter and indifferent. You saved my soul, Marina. Millions is little compared to what you gave me," Roberto explained with determination. Before Marina could process all this information, a nurse appeared in the hallway. She was a motherly woman who had clearly witnessed the entire drama. She smiled warmly at Marina. "Sophia's mother? You can come, she's stabilized and you can see her now," the nurse said kindly. Marina practically ran through the corridors, Roberto following at a more measured pace. When they reached the ICU door, Marina stopped, taking a deep breath to prepare herself. Roberto placed his hand on her shoulder in silent support. "She's going to be fine, Marina. You both are going to be fine now, I promise," Roberto assured with absolute conviction. Marina entered the ICU and saw Sophia, small and fragile but alive. The monitors showed stable rhythms, and color was slowly returning to the little girl's face. Marina approached carefully, touching Sophia's face with trembling fingers. Tears silently flowed as she absorbed the reality. "Sophia, my love, Mommy is here. You were so brave. Mommy is so proud of you," Marina murmured with a choked voice. The ICU nurse approached with an understanding smile. She adjusted some wires and checked the monitors before speaking to Marina in a conspiratorial and gentle tone. "She'll probably wake up in the next few hours when the anesthesia wears off. I'll arrange a comfortable armchair for you. I know you won't leave here," said the nurse with a wink. Roberto temporarily said goodbye, approaching Marina with respect. He didn't want to interrupt the sacred moment between mother and daughter, but needed to communicate something. "Marina, I have some arrangements to make, but I'll be back. You're not alone in this anymore, understood?" Roberto said with gentle firmness. Marina hugged him, a long embrace full of gratitude that needed no words. When he left, she settled beside Sophia and began speaking softly to her sleeping daughter. "When you wake up, my love, I'll tell you about an angel who pretended to be a beggar to test people's kindness, and how Mommy's kindness saved our lives," Marina promised, holding Sophia's little hand. 3 weeks had passed since that terrible day that turned into a miracle, and Marina still needed to pinch herself sometimes to believe it was all real. The private hospital room where Sophia was staying looked more like a luxury hotel room than a hospital environment, with its walls decorated with colorful drawings that Sophia herself had made. Get well balloons floating in the corner, and a beautiful view of the city through the large window. Marina was sitting in the comfortable armchair next to the bed, wearing simple but new and dignified clothes that Roberto had insisted on providing, watching her daughter play with a new doll while humming an invented song. Sophia was unrecognizable compared to the sick child of 3 weeks ago. Her cheeks had regained their healthy pink tone, her eyes sparkled with life and joy, and she gestured animatedly while creating stories for her toys. The sound of Sophia's laughter filling the room was the most beautiful music Marina had ever heard. "Mommy, look, the doll is dancing ballet like I'm going to dance when I leave here," Sophia exclaimed with contagious enthusiasm. Marina smiled with tears in her eyes, still becoming emotional every time she saw her daughter full of life and making plans for the future. She got up and went to the bed, lovingly adjusting Sophia's hair that had grown back and regained its healthy shine. The nurses at the private hospital had become so attached to Sophia that they frequently stopped by the room just to talk and play with her, saying that her joy was contagious and brightened the entire floor. Marina took Sophia's hand and squeezed it gently, amazed at how strong and firm her grip was now, so different from that weak, cold little hand she had held while begging for a miracle. The doctor had said that Sophia's recovery was extraordinary, that her young heart had responded to the surgery better than anyone could have expected, and that she would lead a completely normal life. "You're going to be the best ballerina in the world, my love, and Mommy will be in the front row applauding every performance," Marina promised, kissing her daughter's forehead. It was then that soft knocks on the door announced the arrival of visitors, and Roberto Saldana entered the room carrying a pile of gifts wrapped in colorful paper and an enormous teddy bear that was almost Sophia's size. He had become a constant presence over the past 3 weeks, visiting daily, bringing gifts and, more importantly, bringing his comforting presence that had become fundamental in their lives. Roberto had traded his formal suits for more casual clothes when visiting them, saying he wanted to be just the heart grandpa and not the important businessman. Sophia let out a little scream of joy upon seeing him, extending her little arms for a hug that Roberto returned with infinite care and affection. Marina observed the interaction between them with a warm heart, seeing how Roberto had filled a void in Sophia's life that she didn't even know existed. "Grandpa Roberto, did you bring the giant bear I asked for?" Sophia asked with eyes shining with expectation. Roberto laughed, a genuine laugh that Marina had learned he reserved only for moments with them, and placed the enormous bear on the bed next to Sophia, who immediately hugged it with all the strength of her recovered little arms. He then turned to Marina with a mysterious smile and took from his coat pocket a thick envelope that Marina recognized as important documents. His expression was a mixture of joy and contained emotion as he sat in the chair beside the bed, gesturing for Marina to come closer. Sophia was distracted talking to her new bear, giving it a name and telling it about her life in the hospital, her childish innocence transforming the moment into something even more precious. Roberto cleared his throat and looked at Marina with gentle seriousness. "Marina, the big day has arrived. The doctors have signed Sophia's discharge papers. She is completely recovered and can go home today," he announced, with a voice heavy with emotion. Marina felt her legs weaken and needed to sit on the edge of the bed, the news she had waited for so long finally arriving and bringing a wave of conflicting emotions, joy, relief, gratitude, and an irrational fear that everything could go wrong again. Sophia, upon hearing the word home, dropped the bear and jumped into her mother's arms, her little eyes filling with tears of happiness as she hugged Marina tightly. Mother and daughter cried in each other's arms for long moments, 3 weeks of tension and fear, finally dissolving into tears of pure joy. Roberto watched them with watery eyes, clearly struggling to maintain his composure, while witnessing that moment of happiness that he had helped make possible. When they finally separated, Sophia wiped away her tears with the backs of her little hands and looked at Roberto with that penetrating gaze that sometimes surprised adults. "Grandpa Roberto, now can we have a real house? With a garden to plant flowers?" she asked with innocent hope. Roberto and Marina exchanged a meaningful look, and he nodded for Marina to open the envelope he had delivered. Inside were bank documents, deeds, and papers that Marina had to read 3 times to believe what she was seeing. Her eyes widened, and her hands began to shake as she processed the magnitude of what Roberto had done. Not only had he paid for all of Sophia's surgery and treatment, but he had deposited a fortune into her account, established an educational fund for Sophia, and bought a house for them. Marina raised her eyes from the papers, with tears flowing freely down her face, unable to form words to express the whirlwind of emotions she felt. Roberto stood up and gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "Marina, you gave me something that all the money in the world couldn't buy. You gave me back my faith in humanity and showed me that genuine kindness still exists. This is just my way of giving back," he said with deep sincerity. Marina tried to protest, to say it was too much, that she didn't need so much, but Roberto gently interrupted her by holding her hands between his. He looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her stop talking and just listen. Sophia observed the interaction with childish curiosity, hugging her new bear while trying to understand what the adults were discussing. Roberto took a deep breath before continuing, his voice laden with emotions that he clearly struggled to control. "Marina, in addition to the amount I deposited for you, I created the Sophia Foundation, which will help other children in similar situations. Your story, your suffering, your kindness, all of this will transform into hope for other families," he explained with a choked voice. Sophia, who had heard her name, approached Roberto and climbed onto his lap with the familiarity of someone who had found a grandfather she never had. She looked at him with those enormous, innocent green eyes and asked the question that had been in her childish mind since she heard about the house. Marina watched Roberto completely melt before the simple question from the little girl, his eyes filling with tears that he didn't try to hide. "Grandpa, does the house have a garden?" I always wanted to plant sunflowers. They are happy flowers that look at the sun, Sophia said with the simple wisdom of children. Roberto hugged Sophia with infinite tenderness and looked at Marina with a smile that transformed his usually serious face into something radiant and youthful. He adjusted Sophia on his lap so she could see both adults, and then revealed the surprise he had saved for that moment. His words were carefully chosen so that Sophia could understand and get excited. My dear Sophia, the house not only has a garden, but it has a special flower bed waiting for your sunflowers, and it has a pink room with ballerinas painted on the wall, and it has a kitchen where your mother can make your favorite cakes, Roberto described enthusiastically. The head doctor entered the room at that moment, accompanied by 2 nurses who had cared for Sophia during her recovery. All had wide smiles on their faces, and the nurses carried a small cake with the words, "Congratulations on your discharge, Sophia." The doctor, a middle-aged man who had followed every critical moment of the recovery, approached Marina with the discharge papers in hand. He looked at Sophia playing on Roberto's lap and smiled with deep professional and personal satisfaction. Marina stood up to greet him, still wiping tears of emotion. "Mrs. Marina, it is with immense joy that I declare Sophia completely recovered. What this girl has gone through and overcome is truly miraculous," said the doctor with evident admiration. Roberto carrying a small colorful backpack that he handed to Sophia, saying it was for her to carry her special belongings. Sophia opened the backpack and found inside an empty photo album and a simple instant camera. Roberto crouched beside her and explained that it was for her to document her new life, each happy moment, each achievement. Sophia immediately wanted to take the first photo right there, bringing Marina and Roberto together for a photo that she took herself with the doctor's help. When the photo came out of the camera, Sophia watched it develop with fascination. "Our first photo of the happy family," she exclaimed with innocence. Marina and Roberto looked at each other, moved by the word family spoken so naturally by Sophia. Roberto cleared his throat, clearly fighting against emotion, and then made a suggestion that caught Marina by surprise. He looked out the window at the sunny day outside, and then at Sophia, who was carefully storing the photo in her new album. "How about we go see the new house now? Everything is ready waiting for you," Roberto suggested with contained enthusiasm. Sophia jumped with joy, hugging first Marina, then Roberto, then her giant teddy bear, in an effusive demonstration of happiness that infected everyone in the room. Marina finished packing the last things, her mind still trying to process that they really had a house to go to, that they wouldn't return to the cramped, damp room in the tenement. The nurses threw a small improvised farewell party with cake and soda, while Sophia showed everyone how strong and healthy she was. The doctor signed the last papers and handed them to Marina along with his personal card. "Anything, any doubt or concern, call me immediately. Sophia is a special patient for all of us," he said with genuine affection. When the car stopped in front of a 2-story house, painted white with light blue details, with a well-kept front garden and a low white wooden fence. It wasn't a mansion, but it was perfect, welcoming, safe, in a good neighborhood with a nearby school visible from the street. Sophia let out a little scream of joy when she saw the garden and was already struggling to get out of her car seat. Marina remained paralyzed for a moment, unable to believe that beautiful house was really theirs. Roberto opened the car door and helped Sophia get out. "Welcome home," he said with a warm smile. Sophia ran out along the stone path to the front door, stopping only to smell the flowers that were already planted along the edges of the path. Marina got out of the car slowly, her legs trembling with emotion, and walked as if she were in a dream. Roberto handed her a set of keys with a sunflower keychain, and Marina almost collapsed right there in the garden. Sophia was jumping impatiently at the door. "Mom, open it quick! I want to see my ballerina room," she asked enthusiastically. Marina opened the door with trembling hands and was immediately greeted by a cozy and perfectly furnished interior. The living room had comfortable sofas, a modest television, shelves with some books and picture frames waiting to be filled with memories. The kitchen was complete and functional, with everything Marina might need to cook Sophia's favorite foods. But it was when Sophia ran up the stairs and let out a cry of pure joy that Marina completely lost control and began to cry. "Mom, come see! It's the most beautiful room in the world!" Sophia shouted from upstairs. Marina climbed the stairs with Roberto right behind her, and when she entered Sophia's room, she understood her daughter's scream. The walls were light pink with silhouettes of ballerinas painted in gold. There was a bed with a tulle canopy, a small dressing table, shelves for toys, and a large window overlooking the backyard garden. Sophia was spinning in the middle of the room, her arms open like a ballerina, tears of happiness streaming down her little face. Marina knelt down and Sophia ran into her arms. "Is it real, Mum? Is it really ours?" Sophia asked as if afraid of waking from a dream. Marina hugged her daughter tightly, inhaling the smell of her hair, feeling her heart beating strong and healthy against her chest. She looked at Roberto standing in the doorway, watching them with tearful eyes and a paternal smile on his face. Marina stood up, still holding Sophia, and walked over to him. Without words, she hugged Roberto with her free arm, including him in the family embrace. Roberto hesitated for just a second before returning the hug. "Thank you is not enough for what you've done for us," Marina whispered with a choked voice. Roberto gently pulled away and wiped his eyes, clearly moved. He touched Sophia's face tenderly and then looked at Marina with gentle seriousness. His next words surprised Marina by the vulnerability they contained. "You two have given me something I thought I would never have again, a family. Sophia calls me Grandpa, and my heart fills with joy. You've filled a void that has existed since I lost my daughter," Roberto confessed with a trembling voice. Marina knelt beside her daughter, and together they began to dig small holes in the earth for the seeds. Roberto watched them sitting on a garden bench, his face showing a peace he hadn't felt in decades. Sophia placed each seed carefully, talking to them, telling them they would grow strong and beautiful. Marina helped, guiding her daughter's little hands, teaching about spacing and depth. It was a scene of domestic simplicity that seemed impossible just 3 weeks ago. "Do you know why I chose sunflowers, Mum?" Sophia asked while planting. Marina shook her head, curious to hear her daughter's answer. Sophia finished placing the last seed and looked at her mother with wisdom beyond her years. Her words touched Marina deeply, showing that even at such a young age, she had understood the lessons of their journey. Because even on cloudy days, the sunflower knows where the sun is and keeps looking for the light, like we did when everything was dark, Sophia explained with profound simplicity. Roberto got up and joined them, helping to water the newly planted seeds. The three worked together in the garden, talking about the future, about Sophia's plans to return to school, about the ballet classes she would start as soon as the doctor fully cleared her. Marina mentioned that she would like to go back to work, but also study, perhaps take a technical course. Roberto immediately offered support. "Marina, you have a bank account with more than sufficient resources. You can choose whatever you want to do, work, study, or just take care of Sophia. The choice is yours," he assured her. Roberto suggested it was time for Sophia to rest, and Marina agreed, seeing her daughter's little eyes struggling to stay open. She carried Sophia inside, the weight of her daughter in her arms no longer a concern, but a blessing. Roberto followed them, helping to prepare Sophia for sleep in her new bed. Sophia insisted that Roberto also participate in the good-night ritual. "Grandpa has to say good-night too," she demanded with sleepy determination. Marina tucked Sophia into bed, covered her with the ballerina comforter, and sat on one side while Roberto sat on the other. Sophia held the hand of each one, creating a physical connection between the three. She looked at Marina, then at Roberto, and smiled with pure contentment. Her next words were spoken with the simplicity and truth that only children can express. "Now I have the best mother in the world and the best grandfather of the heart. We are a real family," Sophia declared before closing her little eyes. Marina and Roberto sat there for a few more minutes, watching Sophia fall asleep, her chest rising and falling in a healthy and strong rhythm. When she was sure that Sophia was deeply asleep, Marina signaled for Roberto to follow her to the living room. They went down the stairs in silence, and Marina prepared coffee in the new kitchen while organizing her thoughts. Roberto waited patiently, understanding that she needed to process everything that had happened. "Roberto, I need to say something," Marina finally began. Roberto nodded for her to continue, his gentle eyes encouraging her to speak. Marina took a deep breath and the words came out in an emotional torrent that she couldn't contain. She spoke about the despair she had felt, about how she had lost faith in everything, about how his gesture had saved not only Sophia, but also her soul. "I was ready to lose the most important person in my life, Roberto. I didn't see any meaning in anything anymore, and then you appeared, disguised as a beggar, and taught me that kindness still exists, that miracles still happen," Marina confessed through tears. Roberto stood up and embraced Marina paternally, letting her cry out all the accumulated fears and tensions. When she calmed down, he spoke about his own journey, about the daughter he had lost, about how the fortune he had built seemed empty without someone to share it with. His words were laden with emotion, contained for decades. "Marina, I built an empire but lived in an emotional desert. You and Sophia brought life back to me. You are the family I thought I would never have again," Roberto revealed vulnerably. They returned to the garden, now illuminated only by the light of the moon and stars. Marina looked at the flower bed where they had planted the sunflowers and smiled, imagining the garden full of golden flowers in the future. Roberto was beside her, a solid and comforting presence that she had learned to value. The silence between them was comfortable, full of mutual understanding and gratitude. Marina finally broke the silence with words that came from her heart. "Sophia's sunflowers will grow strong, and each one will remind us of the day an angel disguised himself as a beggar to test if kindness still existed in the world," she said poetically. Roberto smiled and added his own reflection, looking at the starry sky as if he could see his deceased daughter among the stars. His voice was full of peace, a peace he hadn't felt for decades. Anne discovered that kindness was in the most unexpected place, in the heart of a desperate mother who still stopped to help a stranger, he completed emotionally. Marina looked one last time at the house, at the garden, at Roberto, and then at the sky. The full moon shone like a beacon of hope. The same stars she had contemplated in despair just 3 weeks ago now seemed to blink in celebration. She could hear Roberto's soft breathing beside her, feel the night breeze caressing her face, and for the first time in a long time, each sensation was a blessing and not a reminder of her misery. Marina walked to the center of the garden, where the grass was wet with night dew, and knelt right there, not caring about the moisture on her knees. Roberto took a step to help her, thinking she had fallen, but stopped when he realized that Marina was in deep prayer. "Lord, I questioned you so many times, asked why Sophia had to suffer, why we had to go through so much," she began with a voice trembling with emotion. Roberto knelt beside her, respecting her spiritual moment but wanting to be present, offering silent support. Marina continued her prayer, now speaking aloud, as if she needed the entire universe to hear her gratitude. Her hands were joined in front of her chest, and the tears fell freely, wetting the grass below her. "Now I understand, Lord, that you had a greater plan, that our suffering had a purpose, that through our pain you would reveal your goodness in the most unexpected way," Marina continued with an increasingly stronger voice. She opened her eyes and looked at Roberto, seeing in him not just the rich man who had saved their lives, but the divine instrument that had been placed in her path. Marina took his hand and squeezed it tightly, conveying through touch all her gratitude. Roberto had tears in his own eyes, clearly touched by Marina's unwavering faith, even after everything she had been through. "Roberto, you were the angel that God sent, disguised as a beggar so that I could show that I still had compassion, even when my world was falling apart," said Marina, looking into his eyes. Marina then stood up, helped by Roberto, and walked to the flower bed where they had planted the sunflowers. She touched the soil gently, imagining the flowers that would grow there, each one a symbol of rebirth and hope. The soil was dark and moist under her fingers, full of potential, just like their lives now. Marina closed her eyes again and whispered a prayer of gratitude that came from the depths of her soul, a prayer that carried all the weight of her journey. "Thank you for showing me that when we think we are at the end, you are preparing a new beginning," she whispered softly. When Marina opened her eyes, tears of gratitude were streaming down her face, each one carrying the memory of a tear of despair that had been transformed into joy. She looked at the house where Sophia slept peacefully, at the garden that would flourish with their care, at Roberto who had become family, and finally at the infinite sky above. "Thank you, God, for using our suffering to reveal that angels exist, sometimes disguised as beggars testing our kindness. sometimes disguised as desperate mothers showing that love knows no limits, sometimes disguised as doctors and nurses who make miracles with few resources, but always recognizable by the love they carry in their hearts, said Marina, with absolute conviction, her voice echoing in the quietness of the night like a declaration of renewed faith. Now tell me in the comments where you are from, and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. I'll be waiting for you there.